Thank you, David. Good afternoon, Federal Demonstration Partnership. Welcome to the Federal Agency Update. We have a very, very full agenda for today's update. I will say that, as David mentioned, if we do not have time to answer your questions that come in through the chat, we will address those questions and answers will be posted on the FDP website after this event. So with that, I'm not going to use up any more time, but we're going to jump right into it. Our first presenter is with Air Force OSR. Calvin Scott, over to you.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Calvin Scott, Senior Procurement Analyst for the Air Force Office of Scientific Research. And we can go to the next slide. This is what we'll be discussing today, just kind of giving a brief overview about AFOSR, our granting process, research areas, how to improve being competitive, and different opportunities we have. Next slide. Okay, and this slide is just an illustration of all of the locations we have. As you can see, we have several stateside, as well as we have a few overseas locations, and we're in the process of opening one in Australia, so that's something exciting we have on the horizon. All right, let's go to the next slide. All right, and this is basically a breakdown of our technology directorates, with the Air Force Office of Scientific Research being the primary branch for, or primary directorate for basic research. But we're connected with all of the technology directorates, and we communicate with them by updating them in regards to any technical reports or annual reports we receive that may be relevant to the work they're doing at those specific locations. All right, next slide. And what we do is we find research, we form it, we fund it, and the ultimate goal is to transition it to transition it to production, and that's through, generally it's through our SBIR and CITR programs, as well as we're currently looking at utilizing OTs as I guess a flexible vehicle approach for basic research. All right, next slide, please. All right, and this is kind of our granting process, and I'll kind of run through this pretty quick. You guys will submit through grants.gov. Hopefully, prior to submitting, you've been in communication with the grants officer, so they can, the program officer, so they can at least advise you like what direction the Air Force is going in and what we're really looking for, because the proposal process is, it takes a lot for you guys to submit a proposal. So we encourage you to communicate with us early and often, so that, you know, as you're building your proposal, we can at least let you know if it's something that we would be interested in, or kind of help to guide you as far as, you know, what you need to have in the packet, and, you know, kind of answer those questions prior to the proposal being submitted. But once it's submitted in grants.gov, we input it into the system after we do a check to make sure that, you know, you guys are qualified in SAM. Then it goes to the proposal review by the program officer, as well as a peer review. And then if it's selected for funding, we'll forward it for the supervisor approval. Once it's approved, it goes to our financial management team. And from the financial management team, it comes to contracting. We'll check everything to make sure it's allocable, allowable, and reasonable. And then the award is issued. You guys perform, and at the end, once all the reports are received and we have all the necessary documents, we close out the grants. That's kind of everything in a nutshell. Next slide. And this is a breakdown of the current research topics we have. We do have a newly posted BA that's on grants.gov. I included the link in the slide, so feel free to search. You can either type in the grant number, I'm sorry, the solicitation number, which is that FA 9550 number, or you can just click on the link. If you have any questions or you're having any problems getting in contact with the program officer, be sure to shoot me an email on that afosr.baa email. Let's go to the next slide. And this slide is really for, I guess, researchers that are new to the Air Force or to the government. This just gives you some tips on how to be competitive. Definitely, the most important one, and I'm always going to foot stomp this, I'll probably say it 2 or 3 more times, because it's something that the program officers are, they're telling me on a consistent basis. Just, and it's for you guys to reach out, and even if it's just submitting a white paper or a short summary of your research and how you think it ties into the Air Force, that at least is going to give you that initial connection. Now, you still are free to submit proposals without. It's just highly encouraged that you kind of get the program officer more familiar with what you're doing. Proposal. Next slide. All right. It's primarily just if you are new, you may want to take some grant writing courses. Again, reach out to the program officer so you can ensure that your research is relevant to what the Air Force's direction is. And the worst thing that's going to happen, even if it's something that's determined that is not something specific for the Air Force, all of our program officers are familiar with DARPA, ONR, NSF, I think the Army Research Lab. So they have connections. It may not be something that we're interested in, but they may know that maybe the Army's working on this or DARPA's working on this, and they can connect you with one of their counterparts. All right, next slide. Okay, perfect. All right, and this is just a list of some of our funding opportunities. A lot of these opportunities are annual. So like GIP program, it just ended a few months ago. We had a FOA posted for that one. We have several COEs that we post throughout the year. We work with OSD on a few of the depth score programs, and I think we just posted the second one not too long ago, or it just closed out not too long ago. And yeah, right here. And you can go to the next slide. Perfect. And this is just a list. It's like a snapshot of everything we currently have that was posted this year. And last slide for the questions. And I know we're going to be hosting questions. I'll stay on the entire time to see if we have any questions. But if you guys have any questions, please don't hesitate to give me to shoot me an email on the afosr.baa@us.af.mil. And that is everything I have. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Calvin. Appreciate you staying on. From there, we're going to go to NIH. Over to you, Avery Tucker.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Avery Tucker. I'm a grants policy analyst within the Office of Policy for Extramural Research Administration, or OPRA, at the NIH. Today, I'm going to be providing some policy updates and recent updates on NIH systems processes. Next slide, please. So we're almost at the end of the fiscal year, but here are some reminders about the budget that we received for fiscal year 21. NIH is currently funded under an annual appropriations bill that included a 3% increase from fiscal year 20. We have published multiple implemented guide notices over the course of the year, all linked on this slide, that go over things like the salary cap, legislative mandates, our Nrsa levels, and fiscal policies in effect for FY21. NIH also received some additional funds through supplemental appropriations related to COVID-19, and additional details on fiscal operations, including specific funding strategies for NIH institutes and centers, are posted on the NIH Funding Strategies webpage. Next slide, please. Oh, I think there should be a slide here. Yeah, great, thank you. Additionally, I just wanted to highlight quickly our upcoming NIH Virtual Seminar, which will be held from November 1st to the 4th. If you're an administrator, a researcher, an early stage investigator, even a grad student, or anyone new to the NIH grants process, then the seminar is designed specifically for you. Those who are more experienced, we recommend you attend our policy updates and check out our case study series. Registration is free and I believe actually is currently open, so you can find registration links on this slide. Next slide, please. Moving on to some policy updates. Next slide. NIH recently issued a guide notice that updated and implemented new language for non-discrimination legal requirements to comply with 2 CFR 200 and HHS guidelines. Implementation includes updates to language in funding opportunity announcements or FOAs and the terms and conditions of NIH award. The updated language is outlined within the linked guide notice and will be incorporated into the next iteration of the NIH grants policy statement. To be clear, there's no policy change or actual change in requirements, simply an update to the wording as directed by the Department of Health and Human Services. The linked guide notice has, like I mentioned, the specific language and some additional resources. Next slide, please. Additionally, I wanted to include a quick reminder of the NIH disaster policy, as we recently issued a guide notice reminding the applicant community that NIH generally considers accepting late applications when the institution is officially closed due to a natural disaster or other emergency. Institutions need to submit applications as soon as possible after reopening, not to exceed the amount of time that the institution was officially closed. No advance permission is required in this circumstance, and a cover letter explaining the delay must be included. Please see the linked guide notice for additional details. Next slide, please. Over the past several months, our Grants Policy Office has seen a large uptick in inquiries coming in that may be best handled elsewhere. PIs and other staff at our applicant and recipient organizations should always start by going to their Office of Sponsored Programs. And institutions have robust policies and procedures and can most often answer questions directly. For grant-specific inquiries, the AOR, or Administrative Organizational Representative, should reach out to the Funding Institute or Center for support. And when you have tried those options and you still can't get the answer, that's when the AOR should be reaching out to the policy inbox for support. This process is outlined in the reminder guide notice linked in this slide. So just a reminder to the applicant and recipient community. Next slide, please. Moving on to another update. We announced earlier this year that NIH will now provide childcare support to recipients of Nrsa fellowships on or after April 8th, 2021. This applies to full-time NIH Nrsa supported fellowships. Each fellow is eligible to receive $2,500 per budget period to defray childcare costs. And there are more details in our guide notice and extensive FAQs, which are linked on this slide. Childcare costs for Nrsa trainees on NIH Nrsa training grants will be coming later in fiscal year 22 as a phase 2 of this initiative. We will be issuing that announcement and additional FAQs in the upcoming weeks. Next slide, please. Another recent update that we've put out relates to the ERA Commons ID for senior key personnel. The system requirement was put in place to help support NIH's tracking of senior key personnel on our awards. This update is targeting due dates on or after January 25th, 2022. All PDPIs and senior key personnel listed in the R&R senior key person profile form must have a Commons ID. Some additional details are included on this slide and on the link guide notice. For the sake of time, I'm not going to go through it in depth, but please see those links for further information. Next slide, please. Moving on to a subject I know everyone is interested in, commitment transparency. As I'm sure you all know, last year NIH issued a guide notice clarifying the requirements for submitting other support. Our overall goal in clarifying this policy, which has been around for a long time, is to facilitate transparency and reporting of all research activities, both domestic and foreign, not merely financial. Next slide, please. Like I mentioned, reiterating all research activities, both domestic and foreign, not merely financial. Commitment transparency is important to protect the biomedical research enterprise and support research integrity and research security. Failure to disclose can cause NIH to devote our limited resources to research that's already funded, preventing meritorious applications from receiving funding. Next slide, please. In line with our recent guide notice linked in this slide, NIH expects applicants to use the updated Biosketch and other support format for all other support submissions, and will be requiring the use of these updated formats on January 25th, 2022. NIH has extensive FAQs on this topic, and we also have a central mailbox for questions on this policy that's linked on this slide. We're doing our best to answer all questions as they come in and have recently updated our FAQs to address some of the most commonly occurring questions. If you're interested in this topic, our opera director, Michelle Bowles, will be presenting more on Wednesday's Science and Security session alongside our colleagues from NSF, so we look forward to seeing you there. Next slide, please. Next up, yeah, just like I mentioned in our last slide, more information is coming on Wednesday's presentation. Next slide, please. So moving forward to some systems process updates. Next slide. Firstly, I'm going to touch on the FFR submission in PMS. So the single portal for FFR submission that rolled out on January 1st, which required recipients to submit their FFRs in PMS, is phase one of a two-phase initiative. The second phase, as folks may recall, is to eliminate the requirement for separate financial cash transaction reporting, or FCTR reporting. Currently, the PMS system validates information in the expenditure FFR with the FCTR and prevents recipients from manually updating many of those numbers. We've seen reporting on significant errors in the single point of entry since January 1st. Since the expenditure FFRs and FCTRs have different due dates, we're seeing lots of folks get these errors when numbers are out of sync. In the long term, the issue will be resolved with phase two of this initiative, which is eliminating the FCTR reporting. However, in the short term, NIH sent a memo to the Payment Management System, or PMS, requesting that FFRs be treated as interim annual reports, which don't have all the validations and editing restrictions of a final FFR. This will help our recipients in the short term while we look towards long-term solutions in getting this resolved. Since March 2021, PMS has been converting all NIH final FFRs to interim annual FFRs, and this is being done on a weekly basis. So I highly suggest reviewing the linked guide notices for additional guidance on how to address and resolve similar issues with FFR and PMS. Next slide, please. One of the issues that recipients have been encountering is the inability to submit FFRs on closed PMS documents. When a recipient identifies a need to submit or revise an FFR on a closed PMS subaccount, they'll need to contact the NIH Office of Financial Management, or OFM, for assistance in reopening the document. The detailed procedure is outlined within the slide, which can be referenced after this presentation. And next slide, please. The relevant contact information is included on this slide for the Office of Financial Management, and you can reference this as well for additional contact information. Next slide, please. Earlier, we discussed changes to the NIH Biosketch and other support format pages that will be required for due dates on or after January 25th, 2022. This is part of our larger forms transition to Forms G, effective for applications on or after January 25th, 2022. Detailed information about what exactly is changing in the update are available within the linked guide notices and on the next slide. For the sake of time, I'm going to leave these here for your review post-presentation. Next slide, please. This last systems process update is regarding the NIH ERA and its partner agency expansion to require the use of two-factor authentication to access ERA modules using login.gov or in common federated accounts. So for external users that access ERA's modules, including Commons, Commons Mobile, Internet Assisted Review or IAR, and Assist. Starting on September 15th, 2021, ERA will begin a phased approach for requiring the use of two-factor authentication for user accounts. Also, for the sake of time, I'm going to leave this here, and you can review the linked slides. And there's detailed information, further details at these links. Next slide, please. Upcoming changes to the HHS and Fedwide systems. Next slide, please. Before closing up, I just wanted to provide some reminders related to HHS and federal-wide systems. As many of you are aware, there's an ongoing federal-wide effort to move towards the use of the new government-owned Unique Entity Identifier, or UEI, to replace the Dun & Bradstreet DUNS number. The federal government will stop using DUNS by April 2022, and more details about this effort are once again linked on this slide. Next slide, please. I think that concludes my presentation for today with some further information here on this slide about UEI implementation. Next slide. I'm not sure if we have any time for questions, but you can send any relevant questions to our Division of Grants Policy, our Division of Compliance, and our Systems Policy branch as applicable.
All right, thank you, Avery. This is Debbie. What I'm going to do for the sake of time, Avery, you can see the questions that have been submitted in the Q&A section, and you're welcome to submit your answers through that application, or you can answer them post the entire federal agency presentation. So with that, David, let's turn it over. Let's pull up the NSF slides, and I'm going to turn it over to Beth Strauss. Beth, you have 20 minutes.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Debbie. I appreciate it. And as Debbie said, my name is Beth Strausser. I'm a senior policy specialist in the policy office at NSF. And it is a pleasure to provide the NSF proposal and award policy update for you all. I wanted to make a note that my colleagues from the NSF Division of Information Systems will be doing an update and demo on our efforts to move proposal preparation and submission from Fastlane to research.gov. And that session is going to take place tomorrow, Tuesday at 11 a.m. So please stay tuned, tune in, for that presentation. Okay, next slide. All righty. So let's get right into it. The PAP guide has been updated. We issued the draft PAP guide, published it in the Federal Register for public comment back in December of 2020. And we resolved the comments this past spring and then posted the new PAP guide to the NSF website on June 22nd. And it becomes effective for proposals submitted or due on or after October 4th of 2021. So that was, we released it to the community more than 90 days prior to the effective date, as we always do. So, and until October 4th, the current PAP guide, the NSF 20-1, continues to be in effect. Next slide. So, okay, so here are some of the significant changes. First of all, implementation of 2 CFR 200. As you know, OMB issued a revised uniform guidance in August of 2020, and NSF updated our award terms and conditions to implement the revised 2 CFR 200 back in November 12th, 2020. And so now we've updated references throughout the PAP guide to align with NSF's implementation of the uniform guidance. We have a new section on requests for reasonable accommodations and accessibility accommodations. So this provides guidance on the process for submitting these requests. Proposers who require reasonable accommodations as part of the proposal process must submit their request at least 30 days prior to the proposal deadline date. And similarly, individuals who require accessibility accommodations to access NSF's electronic systems must do the same. We have added some context language in various proposal sections. We've expanded that contextual information that we provide you in sections such as the biographical sketch and current and pending support in order to identify the purpose of the section and how NSF uses the information that you provide to us. So hopefully you will find that helpful. Next slide. All right, and we have a bunch of changes to the biographical sketch, the first of which being that we have expanded the biosketch from 2 to 3 pages. So now the proposers must use the NSF approved formats to provide this information. This will allow them more room to enter the required information. Now, as far as some other clarifications that we've made, there is updates to the appointment language, and we have always required that senior personnel identify their appointments. The latest version of the PAP guide makes it clear that in addition to including the individual's titled academic, professional, or institutional appointments at the proposing organization, individuals also must identify all current domestic or foreign professional appointments outside of their organization. We've also added coverage on the use of the option to use et al. For publications that are included in the product section. And if there are multiple authors, then senior personnel may, at their discretion, choose to list one or more of the authors and then et al. In lieu of including the complete listing of author names. We also set of frequently asked questions regarding the NSF biographical sketches. The NSF approved formats has been developed, and we have a link there in the PAP guide to assist users in completion of this section of the proposal. And then finally, the new biosketch fillable format is now available for proposers to be able to see and become familiar with it. And the Science CV format will be available soon and will be posted to our NSF Policy Office website. So I wanted to note that if you are submitting to due dates on or after October 4th, you must use the new biographical sketch format in your proposal. If you use previous versions, you will receive an error. So just take note of that. Okay, next slide. So we also have made some changes and updates to the current pending support section. So we have received a lot of questions about current and pending support, both from a policy and technical point of view. So we've incorporated additional information into the PAP guide from the frequently asked questions that we have on our website. And we have a new section on objectives and overlap that's been added to the NSF approved formats. So together with the current pending information that you provide, these new sections will be used to assess the capacity of the individual to carry out the research as proposed, as well as to help assess any potential overlap or duplication with the project being proposed. There is also in this section of the PAP guide a link to a new disclosure table, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in a minute. As I said, with the biographical sketch, the new current and pending fillable format is now available for proposers to be able to look at and familiarize yourself with it. And then the Science CV format will be available soon. And again, if you are submitting to due dates on or after October 4th, you must use those new current and pending support formats in your proposal. All right, next slide. Okay, so the next topic I'm covering on the blank page trimming functionality for current and pending support, that has been a very popular and welcome change. So previously, if proposers did not need all of the space provided on the NSF fillable formats, there was no way to remove the blank pages. As of August 30th, we fixed that. And for proposals submitted via Fastlane and grants.gov, we are now trimming those blank pages from the current and pending support. It will be available, this trimming service will be available for proposals submitted via research.gov starting October 4th. And we wanted to just let you know, however, that the PDF page numbers will not be updated during the trimming process. So the trim PDF may have skipped page numbers. So just something to be aware of there. Next slide. So in an effort, this is the disclosure table that I mentioned just a few slides ago. So in an effort to provide the community with helpful reference information regarding pre-award and post-award disclosure information in the biographical sketch and current pending support proposal sections, NSF has developed the following disclosure table, and it identifies where these disclosures must be provided in proposals as well as in project reports. So we issued the first iteration of this table in June, and we've made some updates to it in the interim. And we've already received feedback that proposers and awardees find it to be a very helpful resource when completing the relevant proposal and project report sections. So please go out to our website. It's posted now in the policy office website. And as I said, it is also linked in the new 22-1 PAP guide. So take a look at that. Next slide. All right, so last year we implemented a new term and condition regarding post-award disclosure of current support and in-kind information. If an organization discovers that a PI or a co-PI on an active NSF award failed to disclose current support or in-kind contribution information as part of the proposal, then the AOR has to submit detailed information within 30 days of its identification. And the AOR submits that through the other request category in the notifications and request module in research.gov. And then once it comes into us, the request is routed to the cognizant program officer for review and handling. Next slide. Last year, we also made changes to annual and final reports, which are submitted using the Research Performance Progress Report, or RPPR. So the first change I wanted to highlight is PIs and co-PIs must indicate the percentage of the award budget that was spent in a foreign country. And we've added an NSF-specific instruction to clarify this question, stating that they should only include consultant arrangements with foreign individuals and first-tier subawards to foreign organizations. So no other budget categories should be included. And then another big change that we made to the RPPR formats is that PIs and co-PIs must notify NSF when active other support has changed since the award was made or since the last reporting period. And they must include a revised current pending support document as part of that notification. So this is different than the post-award disclosure information I just spoke about. So I wanted to just kind of make that clear. That post-award disclosure is if current support wasn't disclosed as part of the proposal submission. And with this change with the RPPR, this is about if there's been a change in active other support since the award was made or since the last annual report, then that information should be reported in the annual or final project report. And that information is only due at the time that the report is due. Okay, next slide, please. All right, so just rounding out our discussion of the significant changes made to the PAP guide, we have added planning proposals as a new type of proposal, and PIs must contact the appropriate NSF program officer prior to submission, and requests can be up to $100,000 and 2 years in duration. We also have a new travel proposal certification requirement. We specify that AORs must certify that a meeting organizer for a travel proposal must have a written policy or code of conduct that addresses sexual harassment, other forms of harassment, or sexual assault, and that includes an accessible means of reporting violations. And the proposer, you're not required to submit these policies to NSF for review as a routine matter. unless of course we ask, but that would be unusual. Normally you would not have to submit them. Next slide. Some other significant changes. We have added the added coverage on the career life balance supplements. They have been added as a new proposal type, and this implements the requirements for preparation and submission of those career life balance or CLB supplements to existing awards. There is an update to the grant closeout section that states that within 1 year of the end date of an award, grantees will have to submit all required reports, and non-compliance with NSF reporting requirements will land you in the FAPIS, the Federal Awardee Performance and Integrity Information System. And I am so glad that we have that acronym spelled out in the slide, because I can never remember what it stands for. It's got like too many I's or something, I don't know. And then finally, with the PAP Guide significant changes, we have increased visibility of research.gov. So we've updated terminology and links in various sections throughout the document to update and align with NSF's goal of migrating from FastLane to research.gov for proposal submission in 2022. Next slide. Given the recent spate of bad weather and the fact that we're in the middle of hurricane season, we thought it would be helpful to remind you that NSF's policy allows for flexibility in meeting deadline dates due to a natural disaster or anthropogenic event. So that process is outlined in the PAP Guide Chapter 1F. If you find yourself in that situation, you should contact the cognizant program officer in the area to which you intend to submit. Explain the reason why you're requesting an extension to submit after the deadline. And then if the program officer agrees to the extension, then you would just check the box on the cover sheet for special exception to deadline date policy and upload your request and the PO's approval as a single copy document. And that will then trigger NSF's electronic systems to allow for the late submission. And we also wanted to remind you that rapid response research proposals, or RAPID for short, can be submitted to quickly gather data of an ephemeral nature after a disaster as well. Next slide. Okay, so the Fall NSF Grants Conference will take place the week of October 4th. All sessions will have the opportunity for live question and answer period. And the sessions are all being recorded. So never fear if you can't tune in live, they will be available on demand if you're not able to make it. So registration is free and open now to the public. So if you're interested in attending, you can sign up for notifications about this and future conferences and webinars on the conference website that I have posted there to the slide, and just click Get Notified. Okay, next slide. This is my last slide. So as we always say, ask early, ask often. Our email alias is listed here on the slide, and the policy office is here to help with all of your burning NSF policy related questions. So let me see here. Okay, so it looks like I have a little bit of time for Q&A. And let me just look at open the box here. Okay, so it looks like somebody has asked about, is there a sample completed current pending support page somewhere on the NSF page? So because the information can vary so widely, we don't have a filled out, current pending support section out there. But we do, please go out and look at our policy office website, and we have the formats out there now that you can view and familiarize yourself with. Okay, and then let's see. All right, so somebody has asked about the objectives and overlap section. Has that been added to each entry on the current pending support document, or is it a separate section altogether? So, so no, it has been added to each of the entries, right? You would have to give that information for each of the sections that you are submitting. Okay. Let me see here. Okay. And
One minute, Beth.
one minute. Okay. All right. Okay. So
You can always
looks
answer
like,
these later too, as well.
sure. Yeah. All right. So it looks like there's another question about disclosing consulting contracts that they may have, PIs may have over the summer or during the academic year. So yes, if it is a those consulting, let's see, the contract is no. You know what? Let me go ahead. I will do a response since we're kind of running out of time. Let me go ahead. I will respond to that after I sign off here. Okay.
All right, thank you, Beth. Yeah, so let me just remind everybody in the audience as well as the panelists, because the questions are being submitted via the Q&A functionality. The agency rep will be able to go into that function and answer the questions more completely, and those responses will all be made available after the FTP meetings this week on their website. So with that, David, let's pull up USDA slides, and then Matt Faulkner, over to you. You have 10 minutes.
Thank you, Debbie. Good afternoon, everyone. Great updates provided thus far. So this is really from the National Institute of Food and Agriculture, our situation here. Next slide, please. This is our current organizational structure, and of note here is that you'll notice that there are 16 of the 32 positions here that we have acting folks in. You may recall that in 2019, our agency was moved from DC to Kansas City. So we're still very much in a building phase. A lot of people stepping up to hold down the fort, so to speak, on getting our mission accomplished. The area I'm going to focus on today for you is the Office of Grants and Financial Management, which I lead. Next slide, please. And that office is represented by three major components. One is the Awards Management Division, the Financial Management Division, and a Policy and Oversight Division. I guess in the next few slides, we'll go to those really quickly. So next slide, please. This is really the functions of the Awards Management Division. I won't go into those in detail, but basically all the elements of the grant life cycle are represented here. Next slide, please. So for Financial Management Division, this is the agency's financial accounting data and fiscal operations related to federal assistance programs. So again, we got two branches that are a part of this division that handle our major functions. Next slide, please. And then we have our Policy and Oversight Division, which is developing and evaluating our policies for administration of NIFA's federal assistance awards. We have two branches there as well. Again, I'll let you guys look at this post the meeting if you have an interest in how we're structured and the functions that we performed. Next slide, please. So as I said, we moved to Kansas City beginning in 2019. We had this slide titled NIFA Meeting the Challenge. Basically, we lost 80% of our staff in that move, but the focus remained on mission accomplishment. We got a lot of passionate, dedicated, committed staff that have really stepped up. And a lot of that work has been done, I would say, efficiently and effectively through Teams, teleworking, just like probably most of the rest of you. A lot of training in our organization for new staff coming on board, both for our systems and for our business processes. In terms of our FY21 awards, we expect that all of our FY21 competitive grants to be awarded by the end of this fiscal year. And for our capacity grants, we've actually already accomplished that. So I guess the last two bullets here really is COVID-19 related. So we've been responding to new needs of our customers and to address challenges related to COVID-19. And we've implemented the OMB flexibilities in response to COVID-19 as well. Next slide. So for OGFM itself, we've filled about 80, we have about 80 vacancies or 80 positions that we've filled. We're estimating that we have about 130 overall. So we still have some distance to go before we're whole, but we're still getting the job done. We've addressed new programming authorized through the FY21 Consolidated Appropriations Act. And then there's this pilot that we may have spoke about before, but basically it's called the Schedule for Program Implementation from RFA to Award, otherwise known as SPIRA. And we've completed our first year of that pilot. We've learned a lot. Basically, we're looking at the grants management life cycle, and we're trying to spread the workload across the fiscal year for NIFA and our stakeholders. It's really the first time that we've ever really tried to do that, at least from my historical knowledge of NIFA, and so that's really helping to flatten the curve, so to speak, in terms of where the workload may be coming in for grantees and for NIFA itself in terms of processing and making these awards. That schedule is published on NIFA's website at the link that we have here. So I think we're going to learn a lot in this second year of the pilot in terms of where are bottlenecks still remaining, where did we run into limited capacity to be able to process awards, or maybe even feedback from our stakeholders in terms of the burden they may have felt during the time of year that we were asking for these RFAs to be published. But anyway, the whole process is getting more efficient and easier to stay on schedule for making sure we obligate our funds by the end of the fiscal year. And lastly, there's been an effort to put together dashboards for the agency. And these dashboards have been in development for the last several months, but they really are helping us to track our progress of program implementation and funds obligation. What we found is that there's people across the organization that are doing their own manual reports to figure out where are we at and what's coming down the road versus what's been processed. So by doing these dashboards, we've now got more of a one-stop shopping perspective for management and staff, which is enabling them to spend their time on other things rather than running these manual reports. So this whole dashboard thing is not only providing that time-saving process because we don't have to run these reports independently, but it's also providing consistent information across the agency on how we're doing. Next slide, please. So for other OGFM updates, we've updated our policy guide, and it's been provided to OMB for clearance, and it's been shared with our partners as well. We've received input from our partners, and we're looking to include that in an annual update early next year. From a process improvement perspective, NIFA is reviewing our request for application structure and obtain content for possible revisions. The intent here is to standardize and streamline our RFAs with our customers in mind. And lastly, NIFA uses Treasury's ASAP system to provide funding to grant recipients. NIFA temporarily suspends ASAP access for recipient organizations the last 4 working days of each month. So this month, that will be Friday, September 24th at 4 p.m. Central. Next slide, please. Here, basically, our customers, stakeholders, grantees can inquire to us via these emails. So, and clearly competitive and capacity grants, we have emails that they can use to ask us questions or to get answers to troubles or issues they may be having. We've created a new email address here for our 1890s institutes, which instead of having multiple email addresses for them to be reaching out to us at various stages along the grants management process, we just provided one. We have a team of people that's manning that that mailbox, and it's really providing us the opportunity to have a larger awareness from a stakeholder group of their needs and issues, and then have, through a team approach, an ability to address, with the resources that we have as quickly as we can to address the needs of the 1890s. Moving on, we got ASAP customer service inquiry email box, as well as indirect cost inquiries. Next slide, please. From an informational perspective, we have resources on our website that you can access using these links, depending on what it is you're interested in, from competitive grants, capacity grants, certainly coronavirus facts, and then our website as well with more information. And then we have our weekly NIFA update that also gets published. That's available to download. Next slide. And that's where NIFA is at today in terms of getting ourselves back together and delivering our mission. And looks like.
Thank you, Matthew. Time's up.
Very good.
All right. Matthew, just do me a favor and check the Q&A. There's some questions in there for you. You can respond to them at your leisure for the rest of the event. All right, David, let's pull up DHS, and over to you, Heidi. You have 10 minutes, Heidi.
Okay, thank you, Debbie. As Debbie said, I'm Heidi Custer. I'm with DHS's Division of Financial Assistance Policy and Oversight, commonly known as FAPO. Next slide, please. This is just a review of what we do as a headquarters office. And like Debbie said, we're running short on time, and there's 3 after me. So I'm going to go through this pretty quickly. Next slide, please. These are our current initiatives. The main one I want to point out to you as recipients of federal funds is implementing of the DHS's grant measures. OMB is paying special attention to the measures, performance measures, and accomplishments that you have with receiving federal funds. So we're actually asking our components to provide us with quarterly grant measures. So that may trickle down, requiring more specific information from you all as recipients. Next slide, please. We did have Avery from NIH mention the unique entity identifier. We know that we've been talking to you all about this for the past couple years, but it's around the corner. Your agency, if you're registered in SAM, you already have your UEI assigned to you. So at the bottom of this slide, there is specific information how to find your UEI, so you can get that there, because most agencies have already started to include that field in their reporting requirements. Next slide, please. We had mentioned before also the Pandemic Response and Accountability Committee. FAPA represents DHS on this committee. They've been pretty active, not necessarily in the grants world, but with what they're doing with coronavirus relief. So there's a link at the bottom of this slide where you can find their press releases and different data on how much funding has gone out between March 1st of 2020 and June 30th of 2021. So if you're interested in that, you can check out that page there. Next slide, please. Most of the ARP and CARES Act funding that's gone through DHS has been awarded through FEMA. These are lists of some of the programs that they have funded it through. Some of these programs do statewide grants, so you might be eligible for some of these grants at your state level. And to date, well, as of last Friday anyway, FEMA has awarded $53,600,000,000 and change in COVID funding. Most of that has gone for individual assistance. Next slide, please. And this I mentioned the last time through. This is more on a personal level, that through CARES and ARP, FEMA is provided assistance for COVID-19 related funeral expenses. I know my family has applied to receive assistance through this. There's still a lot of hoops to jump through. I know that the OIG is actually starting to look at auditing this program, but if you find yourself in an unfortunate situation and you need to get reimbursed for this, this information has that slide as well. Next slide, please. We really haven't had anything new in the last 4 to 5 months since we met last, so I just wanted to put that out there. Here's my contact information. My director, Vince Sprules, is also on this call, and he can help out with that too. And Debbie, I'm going to yield the rest of my time to the remaining 3 agencies. I haven't really seen any information come up in the Q&A, so I'll turn it over to EPA.
Thank you very much, Heidi. All right, next up, EPA. Alexandra, over to you.
Thanks, Debbie. Hi, everybody. Just a few updates from EPA for you. Next slide. So I'm going to talk to you about our current research funding opportunities, our recent EPA RAINs, which are our recipient applicant information notices. Also want to highlight an upcoming EPA Grants Award Process webinar. And also, as always, want to get you to sign up for our EPA Grants Listserv. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So there's 2 currently active research funding opportunities. These are available, of course, on our website. If you just type in research grants funding opportunities on EPA's homepage, you'll find all of these and some upcoming ones as well. But I wanted to highlight these 2. We have our 19th annual P3 Awards, which is a national student design competition focusing on people, prosperity, and the planet request for applications, hence the triple Ps. It's currently open from August 11th through October 27th. We also have our national priorities. This time it's water innovation, science, and engagement to advance water reuse. It's open from July 19th through just next week, September 19th. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So just wanted to inform you again, all of our RAINs are available on our EPA's Grants Policy Resource page. You can get that link right there. And I just wanted to highlight one that we issued recently this spring, summer timeframe, and it's the status of EPA's implementation of the government-wide DUNS UAI transition. I think, as most of the community knows, based on the policy updates from other agencies, the government is looking to change from DUNS to UAI. And effective May 17th, we wanted to inform recipients and applicants of the status of our EPA implementation of the SAM.gov created UEI. Next slide, please. And right now, the status is, until and further notice, all EPA funding opportunities, both competitive and non-competitive, we're going to continue using our DUNS compatible grant application packages. And no change is going to be implemented at this time. You will continue to use your DUNS number, which is still currently the authoritative source, when completing all forms in the EPA grant application packages. This is further described in a RAIN of what our EPA application package is, and it includes 2 forms that require the DUNS. Right now, it's the SF-424, which is the application for federal assistance, and a specific EPA form, which is EPA Form 4700-4. It's the pre-award compliance review report for all applicants and recipients requesting federal financial assistance. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So next week, we just wanted to highlight for you that we're hosting on Tuesday, September 28th from 2 to 3:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, an EPA Grants Award Process webinar. This is going to be hosted by some of my colleagues in the EPA's Office of Grants and Debarment. And this is a real high-level information session that's going to cover topics related to finding and applying for grants, as well as the basis for managing a grant award at EPA. Advanced registration is required, and you can click on the link below in the slides to visit the site to register, and also you can see the webinar materials. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Just again, as always, just want to highlight our EPA Grants Listserv. You can click on the link here to sign up. You just put in your name and your email, and you will be getting our EPA Grants Listserv policy updates or periodic updates. And these include any new guidance. So like the rain that I'm telling you about now, you would have gotten an advance notice on that. Any new trainings and webinars, such as the one that I just highlighted, can be emailed directly to you. If there's any changes in grants management requirements or other general information regarding EPA, you can get this sent directly to you by just clicking that you want to get this information directly. Next slide, please. It's highlighted on our homepage there. You can just subscribe with one click. It'll take you to the form, easy peasy, and name, email address, and proof. You'll get all that information directly to you. Next slide, please. That's my contact information. If you have any questions about the information that I shared with you today, or any information that you want to seek out from EPA regarding our research information. And I don't see any additional questions, but I'm happy to answer them if they come in. And I yield the rest of my time back to the next presentation.
Thank you very much, Alexandra. All right, Nrsa, over to you, Mary.
Hi, great. Thanks, Debbie. Next chart, please. I'm Mary Sladek. I am with the Science Mission Directorate. I'm pitch hitting today for our Grants Policy and Compliance Branch Chief, Antonise Crank, who was unable to join us. New since May 2021, we normally have 2 grants policy contacts, but we are down to just 1 right now. Hopefully next time we will have a second person. Next chart, please. So again, I'm going to present 3 quick sets of updates from NASA headquarters, where most of our grant policy and grant competitions are managed. Starting with the grants, policies, compliance updates and refreshers. Next chart, please. Some of you are familiar with the OMB memo that promotes public trust in the federal government through effective implementation of the American Rescue Plan and stewardship of taxpayer resources. I am not going to read this whole chart. You'll be able to do that after this session or after the meeting's over for the week. One great thing about the way FDP sets up this is that while this presentation is end-to-end, our charts will be separated out separately on the FDP website, so you will be able to go straight to the agency you want to and flip through those charts at leisure. So the big takeaway from this chart is that NASA has accepted almost all of the dozen or so flexibilities in OMB's M2120. The only one we did not accept is the extension of closeout timeline. Next chart, please. So NASA is Griffin, as I like to call it. We are both a grant making organization, and we also host grantees who do research as visitors at our various facilities. So this means that new since May, as the world is opening it up slightly for COVID, right now we at NASA, most of us are on mandatory telework, but if you are doing something that requires lab work and resources at a NASA center, then you would be doing this requirement for visitors during COVID, which is you would be having to attest that you are vaccinated or that you are not vaccinated and you have been COVID tested. We are getting updates on this minute by minute, really. So the Grants Policy Branch website will be hosting updates on this as they come in. But I just wanted to give you a heads up right now about the impact of this commitment to testing and to vaccination. Next chart, please. So this, I think, is kind of a fun, exciting new term and condition from our grants policy team. It's also new since May. Effective June 15th, NASA issued a new term and condition that requires for-profits to attest that they will respect the lunar heritage sites. We added this new term and condition because just over 9 months ago, Congress enacted the One Small Step to Protect Human Heritage in Space Act, directing NASA to develop practices that limit harmful interference with historic lunar landing and other site artifacts. So, for example, NASA recommends an artifact boundary extending 75 meters from the Apollo 11 lunar module descent site. Next chart, please. The next two charts are details on how the grants policy team and other parts of NASA are striving to implement President Biden's executive order outlining a comprehensive approach to advancing equity for all in the United States who have been historically underserved, marginalized, or affected by poverty and inequality. I want to thank all the FTP members who participated in our NASA request for information, advancing racial equity and support for underserved communities in NASA programs, contracts, and grants, or any part of the July 13th virtual public meeting, either in real time or on demand via our new mission equity page on nasa.gov, which you can, the link is on this chart. Going forward, NASA grants policy will be requiring that all notices of funding opportunities include an express commitment to non-discrimination. We've always had that in our proposer's guide, but now it's going to be repeated in every notice of funding opportunity. A reference copy of this language is in the backup charts of this presentation. Next chart, please. The purpose of this RFI and public meeting was to obtain input and suggestions on how NASA might consider changing, expanding, streamlining its programs and policies and regulations to remove systemic inequitable barriers and challenges facing underserved communities. Many parts of NASA, including my own mission directorate, are exploring how to be more inclusive. And this chart provides a sample of early findings from comments NASA received via the RFI and public meeting, and the grants policy branch's initial thinking on how to address some of the barriers identified. So stay tuned. We expect to be going out again for public comment regarding some of these approaches. Next chart. And so this is the final chart of the grants policy update. Sorry, not the final chart of the presentation, but there's not too many more left. And it is about the Grants and Cooperative Agreement Manual, or GCAM, that we expect to have revised, or the Grants Policy Division expects to have revised before Thanksgiving. I won't dwell on any of the examples on this chart, since, like the rest of the agencies, NASA is preparing to replace the DUNS number with the unique identifier. We also expect that some burden may be reduced for for-profit award recipients by the forthcoming removal of a term and condition that previously required invoice submission prior to payment. Next chart, please. So the Science Technology Mission Directorate develops transformative space technologies to enable future missions. STMD awards just under 60 million in assistance awards a year. Next chart, please. And on this chart, there are just 3 of their notices of funding opportunities that probably are of interest to you. The most exciting one, I think, at least to me, is the graduate student technology research opportunity. This is not a fellowship. One graduate student working with a university-based principal investigator submits for this research grant. If you have questions about any of these trio of opportunities, please direct them to the 3 email boxes shown on the chart. Next chart, please. In short, the Science Mission Directorate supports basic and applied research and technology in order to understand naturally occurring space and Earth phenomenon, human-reduced changes in the Earth system, and develop Earth and space science and related technologies. SMD awards both assistance awards and contracts, and I'm going to talk very briefly about that. Next chart, please. SMD is committed to what we call open source science and our input into inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility, IDEA or IDEA. We have a new science data officer. His name is Steve Crawford. And Steve has gotten and summarized the laws, regulations, executive orders, policies, and best practices which currently bind NASA funding recipients regarding public access to data and software. We are expecting that Steve will be releasing, maybe in October, maybe in November, an RFI for changes to to those requirements. And we will be asking the community, particularly FTP, to check out this newly posted Science Policy Document 41, which is on this page, so you can see what the current policies and practices are. And I've just been warned, I got 1 minute left. So additionally, we want to move beyond what's required by rule, but onto open science. And we are excited because perhaps later this week, we will have our RFI out for our new idea for the announcements of opportunity. Next chart. The next chart is simply 2 announcements of opportunity from the Astrophysics Division. Next chart. And finally, if you are applying to NASA spaceflight programs, you will be happy to know that there is a revised NASA procedural requirement regarding spaceflight program and project management, and you can read about it here and download the very long document at your leisure. Again, thank you, and I'm done.
Well, thank you very much, Mary. That was right on time. So, all right, David, let's go to the GWIR update. Susan Sloan, you have 10 minutes. Over to you.
Hi there, everyone. I'm delighted to be with you today. My name is Susan Sloan, and I direct the Government University Industry Research Roundtable. So as most of you know, GWIR contributes to this update session not as a federal agency, but as a formal convener and secretariat of the FDP within the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine. I should note that the Academies is, in fact, a nonprofit organization. That said, GWIR is its own membership entity with an emphasis on policy and focused on matters of national and global importance in science and engineering that necessitate or can benefit from cross-sector partnership and collaboration. Much like the FDP, GWIR organizes and hosts 3 membership meetings per year on a full array of topics as proposed and selected by the members based on timeliness and perceived urgency. The first meeting of 2021 was a series of 6 virtual discussions held over a period of 6 weeks, starting in February and focused on strengthening US science and technology leadership through global cooperation and partnership. A written summary, what we call a proceedings of a workshop in brief, is openly accessible on both the GWIR and the National Academies Press website. Our focus then shifted for the summer 2021 meeting to a different topic, partnerships and cross-sector collaboration to support climate science and policy. In this case, there were 5 virtual 90-minute sessions included as part of this session, with the written proceedings currently under review. Now for the current slide that we see on the screen, this is the topic and theme that GWIR is currently focused on and that we're in the midst of planning, focused on supply chain and manufacturing challenges and opportunities. This topic is particularly relevant given current interest on Capitol Hill and by the Biden administration, and really prompted by the CHIPS Act, which was passed in the Senate in June of this year and includes more than $50 billion for manufacturing subsidy programs and R&D initiatives to, as in the Senate lingo, rebalance the United States position within the semiconductor industry. Within this meeting, we intend to discuss opportunities for enhancing US approaches to addressing supply chain resilience, security, and sustainability challenges through partnership and, again, cross-sector collaboration. Next slide, please. We'll be hosting a series of 4 virtual 2-hour workshops, as noted in this particular slide. In addition to semiconductors, we'll also be considering the manufacturing and supply chain issues such as anticipating and managing risk, as well as demand disruptions in critical industry sectors like pharmaceuticals, and also emerging and disruptive technologies like quantum computing, AI, blockchain, and the like. Next slide, please. We also this past fall held an ad hoc workshop. Now this one was proposed by one of our member companies, MITRE Corporation, who felt the need for a high-level discussion, particularly since there was so much discussion on Capitol Hill about increasing, and various proposals for that matter, to increase budget authority for science and research agencies, including NSF, DOE, NASA, NIST, and NIH. So in 3 months' time, we took the request from our member company and we pulled together, actually in about 2 months' time, pulled together a session for a series of, or a 2-hour discussion for invited guests on these three, around these three discussion prompts. So key policy challenges of government university industry partnerships, placemaking in government university industry partnerships, and then capital investment. The session co-chairs here were Charles Clancy, who's the chief futurist at MITRE Corporation, as well as Grace Wong, who is the executive vice president for research, innovation, and knowledge enterprise at The Ohio State University. And many will recognize Grace's name as she was at the National Science Foundation for many, many years before. Attendance was, as I mentioned, by invitation only. We had 38 attendees, 8 from industry, 17 from university, 6 very senior level from government, 2 from NSF, FDA, NASA, GAO, the NIH, and CATS. Also 2 from national labs, 2 from foundations, and 3 from NASM, the National Academy of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine. And the event was intended as a catalytic conversation, unlike queer membership meetings where proceedings in brief is prepared or published. Any follow-on product or activity for this discussion will be independently initiated by workshop attendees. Next slide, please. As many of you know, we also host monthly webinars, and so you can see the webinars that we've done since the last FDP meeting. I believe the June 16th meeting on money for nothing predatory practices in academic journals and conferences would appeal particularly to this group. Again, that's a past webinar, and you'd be able to find that presentation, the slides, as well as the recording readily on the GWIR website under past events. I will say that the September event is pending at the moment. The individual that we had reached out to host a webinar has indicated that their program is delayed a bit and they'd like to do it in October as opposed to September. So I don't know whether we'll have a September webinar or not. Next slide, please. I also just want to mention that a search is currently underway, and I am conducting interviews including this week, for a new project coordinator position to provide 100% administrative and programmatic support to the FDP. This individual, once hired, will resume and expand upon the duties once handled by Lillian Andrews, who, as most of you know, left the academies last month in order to start law school. So Lily was dividing her time between GWIR and the FDP, with only 25% of her time devoted to the FDP. The new incumbent for this position will be hired to fully support and liaise with the FDP leadership and the various FDP committees. So excited to see that underway. And next slide, please. I think that's it. I raced through it. So if you have any questions, please let me know.
Thank you, Susan. Appreciate that. All right. I will, since there's only one question in the Q&A, I think what we're going to do is we're going to move on to our special presenter from the Department of Education. And David is pulling up the slide deck. But Antoinette Flores is visiting us from the Department of Education, and she's going to give us an update on the Higher Education Relief Fund. And this is part of the Coronavirus Response and Relief Supplemental Appropriation Act. I think this has a particular interest to our audience from the higher education community. And so, David, it looks like you're still pulling up the slides. Antoinette, are you online with us?
Good afternoon, I am.
Hi, how are you? It's great to see you.
You too.
All right. David, shortly we'll be pulling up your slides. We run this particular session till 3 o'clock. So, as soon as David pulls up the slides, you will have the floor between that moment and maybe 5 till, and that will give us a few minutes to administratively close out the session. So, all right, I see David's taking the next step. So over to you, Antoinette.
Great, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for having me today. My name is Antoinette Ffrs. I'm a senior advisor in the Office of Post-Secondary Education at the department. I'm going to be presenting today on an overview of the Higher Education Emergency Relief Fund under the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021. We at the department understand that colleges across the country are still working on spending their funds. And so I'd like to spend the majority of the presentation on allowable uses and sharing some of the ways that we know institutions are using their funds, in addition to some of the ways that the department is working to ensure accountability and transparency. I only have a short time with you today, and I'm not sure how far we will get or how much time we'll have for questions, but I want to be certain that if you have a question, I can find a way to follow up after the presentation. You can go to the next slide, David.
All right, I apologize, everybody. I am having technical issues. I'm trying to get the presentation to share correctly. So I'm gonna let Antoinette go on, and hopefully I can get this figured out.
Okay, great. And just let me know if you need me to pause. So the presentation that I have designed today is to help guide our conversation and indicate where you can find many of the resources within the department's existing guidance and on our website. Our frequently asked questions go into far more detail than we can cover today, and institutions are encouraged to carefully review the department's full guidance at the end of this presentation and on our Hearth website. If this pandemic has shown us one thing, it's that our educational system and our higher education system in particular is not slow moving and incapable of change. In fact, our colleges and universities are very resilient and can move and adapt quickly. The Biden-Harris administration is all about transformation. We are committed to building back better for all Americans. And that is why President Biden proposed, fought for, and signed the American Rescue Plan. The ARP is a $40 billion investment in higher education, more than is contained in the first 2 COVID recovery packages combined. In total, this $76 billion investment will help colleges and students mitigate the negative impact of the pandemic on students' educational attainment, support students' ability to meet basic needs, target resources to students that have the greatest need, and support campus operations, staffing, teaching, and educational programs and courses. The ARP is also one of the largest single one-time investments ever made in institutional and student grants into many of our nation's most under-resourced institutions, educating students most acutely affected by the pandemic. This includes more than $10 billion to community colleges, more than $2.6 billion specifically targeted for historically Black colleges and universities, approximately $190 million to tribally controlled colleges and universities, and more than $6 billion to minority serving institutions such as Hispanic serving institutions and Asian American and Native American Pacific Islander serving institutions.
Okay, Antoinette, I got the PowerPoint. Which slide should I go to?
Okay, sure. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. We can stop here for now. This landmark legislation is a victory for our nation's students. Next slide. I'm going to spend a few minutes highlighting the major aspects of our guidance, including opportunities for colleges to use emergency funds. That includes emergency financial aid grants to support students, re-engaging students whose education was disrupted by the pandemic, and preventing and mitigating the spread of COVID-19, including efforts to vaccinate students and campus communities. Public and private nonprofit colleges that had already received either HERF 1 or 2 funding under the previous relief packages were not required to submit an application to receive additional funding under the ARP, and all of those funds have since been obligated. Those that did not receive previous awards under the CARES Act were required to apply. The department has obligated all funds under the American Rescue Plan with the exception of the A3 funding stream, which is what we refer to as funding for institutions with the greatest need, and we will have more information on that stream coming soon. From the date of obligations, colleges have a full year to expend both existing HERF funds and the new ARP funds. Institutions generally must expend their HERF grant funds within 1 year from the date when the department processed the most recent obligation of funds for each specific grant. So this is going to vary depending on which grant you received. Thus, institutions that received a supplemental award under the ARP have 1 year to spend all remaining CARES, Nrsa, and new ARP funds for each grant from the date of their supplemental award. Colleges can also request a no-cost extension for an additional year to spend their funds. No-cost extensions may be exercised when an institution has a need for the remaining funds that will be used to prevent, prepare for, and respond to the coronavirus, in accordance with overall purposes of funds distributed under the Education Stabilization Fund. As these are emergency funds, we do encourage colleges to spend their funds now during the national pandemic. Next slide. The ARP has 2 new required uses of HERF 3 for colleges that do not spend their entire institutional portion on student emergency grants. They must use a portion of their funds to implement evidence-based practices to monitor and suppress coronavirus in accordance with public health guidelines, and conduct direct outreach to financial aid applicants about the opportunity to receive a financial aid adjustment due to the recent unemployment of a family member or in the case of an independent student. Next slide. We understand that institutions are well on their way to distributing emergency financial aid grants to students, but this is a priority area for us. And so I'm going to spend some time discussing emergency financial aid grants to students. While the pandemic has affected all students, it has hit some students and their families particularly hard and exacerbated existing inequities within our higher education system that existed long before the pandemic started. As many of you know, the previous administration issued an interim final rule that restricted CARES Act funds to students, including DACA recipients, other dreamers, and similar undocumented students. The final rule on student eligibility, issued in April 2021 by the Biden-Harris administration, makes it clear that emergency financial aid can support all students who are or were enrolled in an institution of higher education during the COVID-19 national emergency. Students are eligible for emergency financial aid grants regardless of whether they completed a FAFSA, are Title IV eligible, or regardless of citizenship. In determining need, we encourage institutions to consider needs such as students who received Pell Grants or undergraduates with exceptional financial circumstances, but colleges can use various ways to identify exceptional need. Beyond Pell eligibility, other types of exceptional need could include students who have faced significant unexpected expenses, either for themselves or their families, such as loss of employment, reduced income, or food and housing insecurity. A FAFSA is not required to be eligible for HERF funds, although we do expect that colleges establish a transparent process for assessing need. Next slide. When making emergency grants to students, colleges must not condition the receipt of emergency financial aid on continued or future enrollment. Use the emergency financial aid grants to satisfy a student's outstanding account balance unless it has obtained the student's written or electronic affirmative consent, or require such consent as a condition of receipt of emergency financial aid grants. Next slide. The department may determine that an institution has failed to prioritize students with exceptional need if the institution establishes any kind of preconditions for students to receive grants, and that includes establishing a minimum GPA, imposing other academic or good standing requirements, requiring continued enrollment, or requiring the student to first pay any outstanding debt or balances. Next slide. The department strongly encourages colleges to use their institutional funds to make additional emergency financial aid grants to their students. Our colleagues in the Office of the Chief Data Officer last week posted a blog on a blog called Data Matters, highlighting initial data gathered from institutional annual reports, which covers CARES Act funds. Many institutions have already spent additional institutional funds on emergency financial aid to the tune of $287 million. It was the second largest category of after reimbursements of tuition, housing, and other fees. And I've linked that blog along with other data insights on institutional spending at the end of this presentation. In reviewing institutional websites and required quarterly reporting, we have seen many institutions that are providing additional support to their students, and I've included some examples here on the screen. Additionally, we remind institutions that all students who are or were enrolled in an institution of higher education during the COVID-19 national emergency are eligible for HERE funding. And many institutions such as Austin Community College and HSI in Austin, Texas, clearly communicates to their students that they do not need to receive federal financial aid in order to receive an emergency HERE grant. And Austin Community College is not alone. An analysis by the GAO found that 50% of colleges in a sample did not require FAFSA. Next slide. We know the pandemic has upended the lives of countless students, including displacing many who were forced to withdraw from classes. The department recognizes the personal and communal loss that can occur when students are forced to delay or entirely forego their post-secondary education. Institutions can fund additional student academic, financial, and mental health support systems that help students persist, and we encourage you to do so. Student support services, this includes student support services such as childcare, food, housing, and healthcare, academic supports, technology needs, financial supports, including additional emergency grants, and mental health resources, including peer support groups, and supporting coping and resilience for students. Next slide. Many institutions are already using their funds to support students in this way. For example, we have Foothills de Anza Community College, which established a mental wellness ambassador program aimed at promoting mental health services, reducing stigma surrounding mental health disorders, creating community, and fostering an inclusive and non-judgmental campus culture. Grand Rapids Community College purchased laptops, hotspots, and pushed Wi-Fi signal out to students at public library parking lots in rural areas. Blackfeet Community College purchased 500 laptops using previous relief funding to create a loaner program that allows students to remain enrolled and engaged with their academic studies. And Alcorn State University used relief funds to provide an enhanced virtual academic support services. Next slide. While direct marketing and recruitment activities are an impermissible use of HERE funds, Efforts to re-engage students who would otherwise be at risk of not completing their college degree as a result of coronavirus is a permissible use of HERE funds that can have a positive impact for students, institutions, and their local communities. Institutions may re-engage students by discharging student debts owed to their institution so that students can re-enroll, continue their education, obtain transcripts, or transfer to another post-secondary institution. Next slide. At this point, we have many examples of institutions using their HERE funds in this way, but for example, Delaware State University earmarked $730,000 of their American Rescue Plan allocation to cancel the debts of more than 200 recent graduates. These graduates who struggled financially during the coronavirus pandemic will have on average $3,200 in debt discharged. Next slide. To help institutions quickly and effectively use ARP funds to support students and communities, the department released guidance detailing how institutions can use these funds to monitor and suppress the coronavirus. Public and private nonprofit institutions in particular must use a portion of their institutional award to implement evidence-based practices to monitor and suppress coronavirus in accordance with public health guidelines. Institutions may use funds to detect coronavirus transmission, such as funding the costs associated with diagnostic or screening testing, setting up testing sites, purchasing tests, and hiring additional personnel to administer tests. Institutions may also work to prevent the spread of the virus by using institutional funds to spread awareness and build confidence in getting vaccinated, to set up vaccination sites on or off campus, including the cost of bringing sites to rural and satellite locations. Additionally, you can reduce barriers to vaccination by offering paid time off and sick leave for staff. Next slide. Many institutions are already using their funds to support students in this way, and the work is ongoing. So for example, Alabama State University and HBCU in Montgomery, Alabama, used prior relief funds to prioritize health and safety of students, faculty, and staff through the purchase of personal protective equipment. Mountain View College and HSI in Texas has used prior relief funds for PPE masks and enhanced weekly cleanings. Next slide. Under the ARP, and this is similar to previous rounds of relief, colleges can defray expenses associated with the coronavirus, including lost revenue, reimbursement for expenses already incurred, technology costs associated with any transition to distance education, faculty and staff trainings, and payroll. Our guidance provides a number of examples, and I have that linked at the end. But for example, you could pay for minor remodeling, including the installation or renovation of an HVAC system to help with air filtration, the purchase or lease of temporary trailer classrooms, or the cost of installing room dividers and other interventions to prevent the spread of COVID-19. You can support your staff, such as paying students for internships and job training, experiences that are aligned with local coronavirus-related recovery needs, salaries for staff who are unable to work during any period due to campus closures, and any additional overtime work staff incurred from March 13th, 2020 onward associated with the pandemic. We encourage you to focus on the equitable treatment of your employees when protecting jobs, including adjuncts, teaching assistants, and service and maintenance staff when considering these opportunities. The department has numerous tools in place to ensure accountability and compliance with HERE fund rules, and I'm going to focus on two of them. One is on reporting. HERE grantees receiving ARP funds must continue to adhere to the quarterly reporting requirements implemented through the CARES Act for HERE 1 funding. Quarterly reports on usage and outcomes must be published on institutions' websites. This form must be conspicuously posted on an institution's website no later than 10 days after the calendar quarter, with the next deadline being October 10th. This also includes annual reports on the usage and outcomes which are submitted to the department for analysis. We will be collecting this data in early 2022, and we have more to come on that soon. For transparency, the department continues to update its interactive education stabilization fund online portal. And if you haven't seen it, I encourage you to give it a look. It's a really great resource. And finally, on audits. Auditing requirements for the Hearth grant fund fall into two categories. Those for public and private nonprofit institutions that may be required to submit an audit under the Single Audit Act Amendment of 1996, and that for proprietary institutions that the department requires to submit a similar audit to the department. Audits form a critical component of the federal government's proper oversight of grant programs generally and of the disaster relief provided during the COVID-19 pandemic specifically. Quality audits are reliable and effective tools to improve the integrity and effectiveness of the department's programs and help assure the American public, Congress, and the department's Office of the Inspector General that taxpayer dollars are being used effectively and efficiently. For those that must submit an audit, this includes private, nonprofit, and public institutions that are more than $750,000 or more during the fiscal year, or any proprietary institution that either expended $500,000 or more in Hearth grant funds in the fiscal year, or was on federal student aid's heightened cash monitoring lists, 1 or 2 in the fiscal year in which it expended Hearth grant funds. In our latest update in August 2021, the Education Stabilization Fund, which includes Hearth, was designated a higher risk program in the Office of Management and Budget's compliance supplement. Consistent with the criteria for auditing higher risk programs outlined in the compliance supplement, the department strongly encourages auditing of ESF funds when it submits its single audit at the end of its fiscal year. Here at the department, our goal is to provide information that is clear and comprehensive. And to achieve this goal, we've worked with a number of stakeholders, including groups that produce auditing standards that institutions and all nonprofits must comply with, and trade associations to ensure that the language in our guidance was clear for those who might be charged with institutional oversight. I hope that these resources are helpful to you, but I'm open to questions, and we are always open to questions. I've included several email addresses at the end of this slideshow. And then lastly, I've highlighted many examples of how colleges are using their funds. We are always interested in hearing from you on the many great things you are doing with Hearth funds to support students now and over the long term. Thank you so much, and I welcome any questions you might have.
Thank you, Antoinette. So one question did come in for you. It is this: will there be a 4th round of Hearth funding?
So I would assume that means if Congress passes an additional round of relief, but to date, the American Rescue Plan is the 3rd and final to date round. As I mentioned, all of those funds have been obligated with the exception of the A3 funding stream, which is for institutions demonstrating the greatest need. So there will be more to come on that. And so there's one more round of relief under the American Rescue Plan. But as for a 4th official round, that will depend on Congress.
All right, thank you. So there is one more remaining question, and that is for actually USDA, but I think our representative Matthew has had to drop off the meeting. So we will have that USDA question answered offline. So that is all I had. Don't see any more questions coming in through the queue. So David Wright, back to you to close it up.